Okay, hi everyone. So, welcome to today's live stream. I'm going to be going through a variety of different responses that students have submitted to me over time and just providing some practical feedback on how you can actually improve some of your draft essays. So, mainly focusing on essays today, but just to give you some context, I'm recording this as of the 18th of September, 2022. So, there are only a few weeks left. I think just over 3 weeks, maybe 3.5 weeks until the final HSC English exams. So that's not a whole lot of time. Therefore, the first thing I want to go over is I actually want to go over some preparation strategies here. I can see we've got a couple of people joining. Thank you so much for joining. Just confirm that everything's coming through okay and you can hear things, test out the comments, ask any questions in that section if you have any questions about how to prepare. But what I would recommend at this stage of the process, at this stage of the timeline, is that you actually are at that point of familiarizing yourself with your draft essays as well as your draft compositions and reflections for the craft of writing. So this next week coming up is really for me about familiarization and actually memorization as well. Now I say familiarization because what I would be doing is getting each of my essays, making sure that I have refined them. I've got the feedback. Hopefully, you've already done that. Hopefully, you've applied the feedback from your trials. Get feedback from your teachers if you've made any changes. The next thing is hopefully you've timed those essays. So we're grabbing that draft, we've polished it, we're really happy with it, we've timed it out. If it's a 40-minute exam or a 40-minute section allocation, then what you want to be preparing for is about a 32 to 34-minute draft. Okay, because if you have 40 minutes to write your essay, you need to have a buffer time to adapt to the question. And to avoid being super stressed out during the exam and to avoid the problem that a lot of students make, which is to actually just write a pre-prepared essay and then they completely ignore the question that they've been asked. To avoid that issue, you need to be confident that you could write out your draft essay in about 32 to 34 minutes. Okay, so if you have 40 minutes to write an essay, 32 to 34 minutes is what you want to be able to write your draft essay out in. Okay, so make sure you've timed out your essays. This is the time to do that. Last week, probably on my ideal timeline, was the week to do that. But if you haven't done that already, make sure you're doing that this week. So time out your draft essays for all of your final HSC English exams, all of those sections, time them out ASAP. I would do that this weekend, okay? 32 to 34 minutes for all of your essays. You might think you've got a really great essay, but it's 40 minutes long, but you feel like you can just make that work on the day. It will not work on the day. You'll have to be really brutal with the things that you're cutting out of your essays. You won't want to cut out things, but you should do it because it's going to save you a lot of time on the day, and it's going to mean you actually finish in time and you won't have half finished essays and you won't run out of time in one of the sections of the exam. So just do that now if you haven't already done that. Time out the essays, 32 to 34 minutes, cut them down, make sure they're in that range. And once you've done that, what I would be doing this week, as I said, is familiarizing yourselves with those essays. And the way that I do that is, of course, to read through the essays. I usually print out a copy of the final draft essay. I have the time below, so hopefully it's around 32, 33 minutes. I have the time there. I have the full essay. It's printed out. And then what I'm doing is I'm reading through it. And then I'm looking at other questions. I'm looking at past HSC questions. I'm looking at past HSC trial questions. Okay. And if you need more questions, just let me know in the comments and I'll put a link in there for you, which will give you access to a whole bunch of past papers so you can test yourself on different styles of questions. And it's really important to do that. Don't just keep doing different questions that are the same style. For instance, make sure you're doing essay questions that might have extracts involved. Okay, so you might actually have some extracts there where you need to include a certain quote or passage from the text that you've studied. Maybe that is actually included in the question. That's one of those types of questions that you would want to practice. You'd also want to practice a question that was about themes. You'd also want to practice a question that was about form. So a form-based question, which is like, how has Orwell used storytelling? It would be about like storytelling, or what mode of storytelling has enhanced George Orwell's exploration of some idea, right? So something to do with the storytelling, something to do with form, the way that a text has actually been written or represented. That's a question you want to practice. You, of course, want to practice your theme-based questions, which is like, how is the text about power? How is it about manipulation, et cetera, et cetera? And you want to have a question that you practice for each of your essays that is to do with a stimulus where you actually get an extract from that particular text. So practice those 3 different types of questions for each of your essays, okay? And then as you think about those, practice writing out those essays that you've got there in draft form. Practice writing those out in response to those different questions, okay? And as you do that, you're going to get really familiar with the content that is in there. So for anyone joining, for anyone watching now, I'm just going through some preliminary advice here. I'm about to go into some live student edits. It's going to be super useful for you. So if you're watching this, stay tuned because I'm about to share the screen here and show you some examples of what students have written for different types of essays. And then I can give you some quick feedback, some quick tips on how you can improve those essays if you are making similar mistakes or perhaps you have similar areas that you need to improve on. So about to do that, but yeah, we want to have those practice questions. You want to be familiarizing, actually going into memorizing. So the difference there is with familiarizing, you're looking at different questions, you're still referring to the draft essay. And again, I would have that as a printout. And then you're writing essays, full essays at this stage, 2 to 3 essays based on those different question types. You're writing them out, but you're still referring to that print off there. You don't necessarily need to have it all up here in your brain yet. Okay, so you're just familiarizing, you're getting used to how you would tweak the question, tweak the essay to the question rather. And then the next thing you want to do, once you've gone through a few practice questions for each one, is to actually sit there and make sure you have memorized those essays, okay? So again, you're memorizing the essays so that you're more efficient at answering the question on the day. So when teachers tell you, oh, you shouldn't be memorizing your essays, you shouldn't be doing that, I get where they're coming from. They're coming from the perspective that they don't want you to go into the exam on the day and regurgitate the exact same essay that you have memorized. So that's what they're afraid of. And a lot of students do that. But there's a couple of things. The reality is that a lot of students will actually go better because of doing that, especially if you're like in the lower or middle bands. You're going to go better just memorizing a really solid essay, making a couple of tweaks to the question than if you just went in there and tried to write an essay from scratch answering the question. The quality is probably going to be a lot higher in the memorized case, right? But if you're really going for that band 6 level, the reason you want to memorize is so that you're not wasting time on the day thinking about your quotes and thinking about how you want to start the sentence. You already want to know all of those structures. You want to know exactly what you want to write about in each sentence. It doesn't mean you have to write exactly the same words that you memorized. It just means that each sentence has a purpose, a preset purpose. But then you can reframe the way you articulate the content of that in accordance with the new key terms of the question. Okay, so you're still saying the same thing in each of your sentences, essentially, but the way you're saying it, the wording you use to convey that same point is going to be dependent on the question on the day. Now, if you've memorized an essay and you know it's 32 to 34 minutes, you'll have your sole energy and focus on the day being that process of adapting and tweaking. So that's why it's actually good to memorize, so that you don't have to waste time trying to think about the basic things like, what were my quotes? What were my techniques? How do I start a sentence? So I would strongly advise in this coming week to familiarize yourself with essays, take a look at a few different types of questions for each essay, practice writing those out and making those changes, and then sit down. This is going into next week as well, so the week after. Sit down and make sure, I actually stand up when I do this, so you don't necessarily have to sit down and do this, but get the printout of your draft essay, walk around the house if you need to, walk around your room, remove all distractions, and memorize that essay line by line, and then make sure you can write that out. I have a YouTube video on how to memorize in a really efficient way, so make sure you just search that up, just type in how to memorize an essay, and you'll see that Jedel has a video on that. Now, does anyone have any questions about how they should prepare? I'm just seeing here if we've got some comments or questions coming through. Okay, so please just post your questions if you have any, and we'll go from there. Otherwise, I'm going to share the screen and we're going to do some live feedback. But please, if you have any questions, just ask now. Otherwise, hopefully that helps. That's what you should be doing this week, this weekend. In the coming week, you should be familiarizing, practice different questions, making sure you've timed out all of your responses, including Module C. And of course, weaving in a few practice Section 1 responses as well. So yeah, anyone just leave a comment, leave a note here if you are watching this. Just say hi, just so I can see that the chat function's working. So please feel free to do that now, and let's share the screen. Let's look at some student responses, and you can try and apply the feedback that I'm giving to your own work. Okay, so coming on here now, let's see if we can make this work. We want to do share screen. We want to do a window. We want to do student responses. Let's go. Let's see if this works. All right, cool. I think that's coming up for you. Hopefully you can see that. Let me know if you cannot see it, but hopefully that's good for you. How many quotes in a paragraph? Oh, here we go. Thank you for the comments. Yeah, how many quotes in a paragraph? So in each of your body paragraphs, what I would recommend having here is, and let me just fix this up actually. I want to be down in there we go. That looks a bit better. Okay, how many quotes in a paragraph? For each of your paragraphs, I would have 3 to 4 quotes that you are analyzing. Okay, so 3 to 4 quotes. If you have 3 body paragraphs, I would aim to have 4 quotes. Okay, you can have multiple quotes in the same sentence though. Okay, so we want to have 3 to 4 quotes, 12 quotes in total for an essay. So think about it like that: 12 quotes in total, rule of thumb for an essay, 12 quotes. So if you have 3 body paragraphs, then you want to have four pieces of evidence in each one. But if you are a slower writer, you'll find that if you time that out, you probably can't do that in 32 to 34 minutes. So maybe you'll have 3. So I would recommend at least 3 quotes per body paragraph, no matter what, unless you are going way over time and you're not going anywhere close to 34 minutes when you write out the draft. Then you might have to consider removing one of those 3 quotes in one of the paragraphs. I would advise if you're going to take an extra quote out in any of the paragraphs, do it in your last paragraph, because that's the last thing the marker reads. You obviously want to make a good impression. So make sure you've got everything in that first body and the second body. And if you have to remove some things like a link sentence, or you can only have 2 quotes in one of the paragraphs because of time, then make sure you're taking things out from the third body paragraph. Okay, so aim for 12 as a rule of thumb, 3 to 4 in each paragraph, but make sure you're not just using quotes for techniques. Make sure you can try and integrate quotes in a more subtle way where it actually becomes part of your effect. So when you're explaining the purpose of a technique in a different quote, you can then integrate another quote from the text to kind of add or complement your explanation of that technique. Okay, so you can use quotes in 2 different ways, and I have a video on this, but you can use quotes in 2 different ways. You can use the quote as an example of a technique and then write about that, or you can use a quote to kind of complement what you already wanted to say about a different quote. So there are 2 ways to use quotes. Just on that note about quotes here, what if you can't write out 12 quotes worth of analysis? My paragraphs are 3 to 350 words. Clinton, that is really long, and that's concerning. Your paragraphs, guys, should not be 300 to 350 words. That is so bulky that they're going to be like 2 written pages each. And that just means you're not being concise. I would say even if you're doing a 3 body paragraph structure, so you have an intro, 3 bodies, and a conclusion, I can't imagine why you would need to have more than 250 words maximum in a body paragraph. When I'm working with students, and these include students who are ranked first in their year group, they're coming first right now going into the HSC, we're looking at doing 200 to 250 in words in each of the body paragraphs for a 3 body paragraph. So 3 to 350, you really need to consider cutting everything down, Clinton. That's why you can't write out 12 quotes worth of analysis, because you've got so many other sentences that don't need to be there. You just need to go through very methodically and have a look at this even here, Clinton. Like if you guys have a body paragraph, before I look at the first one, here's how I would lay out body paragraphs. Hopefully this is useful for you. Let's go up here. Body paragraph structure. You should all do this. Go through, and you basically want to have a topic sentence, one sentence, just one sentence, okay? And then what you want to do is you want to have 3 sentences, or 3 to 4 sentences. Let's say you're doing 3 bodies, followed by a link sentence where you link to the question, right? So that's 6 sentences in total. Clinton, I can't imagine your 300 to 350 words are done in 6 sentences. So I think you should go back through and really consider how you can make each sentence more concise and efficient in terms of expressing what you want to say. So you have a topic sentence. That's where you say the idea, you introduce the idea, and there are other elements that you might introduce. We'll look at those in a second. And then here you want to go like straight into form, something about form or context, plus your first technique, your first specific technique. So maybe you say, I'll give you an example of that. So maybe you say something like, facilitated by the dramatic form, really simple one if you're studying a play, right? The soliloquy or the kind of use of personification in random character, Shylock's soliloquy. Random example, but you can see what I'm doing there is I am going straight into the technical analysis. So if you're someone who's got too many words in each paragraph, go back through your evidence and actually ask yourself, how efficient am I being in terms of getting to the point here? So facilitated by the dramatic form, there's our form bit. We could also say, I sometimes like things like reflecting, the patriarchal values of Elizabethan society. Like that's just an example. It's an example. I'm not saying that's the one you have to use of a clause. It's a clause, right? It's the opener. It's the opening part after your topic sentence. So once you say what the key idea is, you can then say reflecting the patriarchal values of Elizabethan society. So that's clearly to do with context, or you can do facilitated by the dramatic form. That's the form bit. So you can do one of those two and you can alternate those, and you can even do them multiple times in the same paragraph. But what you do after that clause is you then bring in the technique here. So the use of personification, as he asserts, and then you can like do the quote, and then you go to your, then you explain what it means, emphasizes, this is what it emphasizes. Okay, cool. That's my first point. Next one. And you do 4 of those and you do 3 paragraphs of those. So hopefully that helps you with the structure there. Okay. Let me know if you've got any follow-up questions about that, Clinton. But look, if you can't write out 12 quotes worth of analysis in the way that I'm showing you, although, as I said, I think you can cut out at least 100 words from each of your bodies by the sounds of it, if you just go back and restructure things and use this dot point format as well to break things up, because it will allow you to more easily see each component. Like this is a thing for all of you as well. If you've got your essays there and you need to cut words down, don't leave them in bulky paragraphs altogether. I split up each sentence. I look at each sentence individually. So I have the topic sentence and the links by themselves, and then I have dot points for each of the middle sentences. And that way I can really see, okay, how many words do I actually need to make this point? Okay, and more often than not, you'll find that you might have 2 or 3 sentences on the same point, and you can reduce that to 1 sentence by just writing the sentence in a more structured, purposeful way, like I've just shown you. Okay, so what was the other thing here, Clinton? Yeah, so if you couldn't do 12 quotes even still, then as I said, you just have at least 3 quotes that you analyze per paragraph, if that means that you can do it in 32 to 34 minutes. How many words would you recommend for each analytical statement? Oof, that's too precise. That question, I don't have a range for you there. When you say for each analytical statement, are you talking about the effect here? Like after you introduce the technique, how much should you say about it? It's just got to be something specific. The more concise, the better sometimes. Like the best students, sometimes the very best students can say what they want in like 10 words after it. So they could say emphasizes the something, 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 and then it's basically done. And it's like, wow, they said everything really succinctly. Okay, so maybe it's going to be like take up another line here, a line to 2 lines, but it shouldn't be that long. You might start off with it being long, and then you've got to try and reduce it and reword it so that you're saying the same thing in less words. That's the whole craft of drafting and editing. Okay, so yeah, a couple of lines, 1 to 2 lines, but be as succinct as possible. Just make sure you're saying something specific that clearly connects with the quote that you are analyzing. Okay, the marker's got to be able to see a clear connection between the quote you used and what you're saying about it. All right, so say something specific, one thing specific in each sentence of analysis, and that's a good rule of thumb. Now, going back up here, we've answered that. We'll come back to the Mod C questions in a second. Am I able to do an example body paragraph for text and human experiences? Yeah, I'll show you one. I mean, I'm not going to write one live here, but what I'll do is I'll edit someone else's who submitted it for review. So Andy, just bear with me and we'll get there very shortly because, excuse me, I'll try and get through those pretty efficiently, okay? I'll just go through and offer a couple of tips for each of them. Okay. Let's see. I'll come back to this one, Tony. Is it fine to make a judgment at the end of a discursive, or would that be too persuasive? I think, actually, I will answer that now. Tony, with the module C1, it's a good question. Should you make a judgment? I think what you should do is make an observation and kind of leave the reader to ponder something like, oh, maybe I have to consider that. So it's like, leave us with something to think about. Don't assert something at the end. Oh, so this is the case. It's more like, hey, so this is what I've realized. This is my experience. Perhaps this is the way things are. But it's like, it's perhaps, it's maybe. It shouldn't be assertive. I would do that more for the persuasive, as suggested there. Okay, how many techniques should I have in each essay paragraph? Well, if you're having 4 quotes for a 3-body paragraph structure, right? 4 quotes per paragraph or 12 quotes total, you need a technique for each of those quotes. So don't have quotes. Don't use a quote unless you have a technique to go with it. And try and also use quotes that you can link to context or the form of the text. And you can see in the example here, see how we would get a quote that also links to the dramatic form. And that's because I would do it in a soliloquy, because the soliloquy is unique to a play, right? Also, so try and use quotes, help you, like, be kind to yourself by using quotes that you clearly can see a technique for. For instance, here I would use a quote that was personification, but I'm also using one that clearly reflects the contextual value that I want to talk about as well. So if it's patriarchal values, that's about kind of male domination in society, like the dominance of male control over females, right? If we wanted to talk about that, then I would use a piece of evidence that relates to it. And I would also make sure that piece of evidence has a clear technique, like personification. So make your life easy by choosing the right quotes that clearly have a technique and that clearly link to context or form. But yeah, every quote that you're using at the start of the sentence should have a technique. But I also did mention that you can use quotes in another way where you incorporate it into your explanation. You wouldn't need a technique in that case. But let's just say, rule of thumb here, you need at least one specific technique per sentence, okay? Even if you're using multiple quotes. So 1 per sentence. Okay. Okay. Summer or Sema, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, with short answer, what if I don't understand the text I'm given? What do I do? That's actually a really good question. So if you guys don't understand the particular short answer question you're looking at, it doesn't mean you have to get 0. This is the mistake a lot of students make. They freak out in there and they go, oh my gosh, this text is just not clicking. I'm not digesting it. Maybe it's because you're stressed that you're not able to actually properly read the text itself. Like the words just aren't going in. Don't worry, I've been in that situation. It doesn't mean you get 0. It does if you let it. It does if you're like, oh, I don't understand the text, I'm going to leave this. Don't leave the answer, okay? What you do is you try and find individual sentences that make sense. So don't worry if the whole text doesn't make sense. If it's a poem, for instance, that just isn't clicking, find a line of a poem that you can roughly translate and you go, okay, I get what that line's saying. It's like, okay, well, let me just focus on that. Find a technique in that line and find a link between that line and the question. Just find one link. You just need to find one connection and just do that 3 times if it's like a 4 marker, or 2 times if it's a 3 marker. Because for a 3 marker, you only need 2 pieces of analysis plus a topic sentence. In terms of what your topic sentence is and the ideas that you talk about, you just base it on the individual sentences that make some sense to you. So hopefully you're reading through a text, you're not understanding it, but at least you can like zoom in on a couple of lines at the start of it, the middle, and the end. I sometimes just focus on the start and the end, right? And I just try and find a couple of sentences that make sense. Or especially if it's a really long text, I just zoom in on the first paragraph and the last paragraph. And then I find a couple of sentences that make sense. And I go, okay, what kind of technique is in there? What technique is in there? How can I link them to the question in some way? And you'll be surprised how well you could go just doing that. Okay, the marker's not going to know that you didn't understand the whole text as long as you have a clear connection between those quotes that you have used and the words of the question. Okay. All right, Pam, with short answers. If a question says, I should probably bring this back up as well. Let me just remove that for a second. With short answers, if a question says explain the use of metaphors, explain how the use of a metaphor represents, does this mean that you can only talk about metaphors for each point of analysis? Okay, that's a really good question. If the question specifically asked about metaphors, then you should try and identify an extended metaphor or a broader metaphor that is present in that text, because there probably is one. However, it doesn't mean you only have to use metaphors in your analysis. It's a really good question. Try and mention one example of a metaphor or what you think might be a key metaphor in the topic sentence. But after that, you can find other techniques that support the metaphor. Okay, so you don't have to just get a whole list of different little metaphors. You can actually say what one metaphor is, and then talk about how the simile or personification or some kind of repetition, how they actually support that metaphor, how they play into that metaphor, how they reinforce the metaphor, perhaps. Okay, so you can still use other techniques. Just make sure they relate to at least one of the metaphors or the metaphor that you mentioned at the beginning of your answer, which would be a topic sentence. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Identify one kind of metaphor, then you can use other techniques that link to that metaphor. That means you don't have to just have a whole list of different metaphors, because that might be really hard to identify, and that's probably not the right way to interpret that kind of question. Okay. I have a prepared discursive, but have an imaginative first paragraph, then goes into the thought process of the character where I write my discursive. Sure. Do you think this would pass? Yeah, it's a little bit contrived, right? Because you're trying to wedge the pre-prepared discursive into an imaginative, which I fully get, by the way, and I actually think you're on the right track there. What I would say, though, is it's probably not enough to just have a different opener, because obviously if you're doing an imaginative, you need some kind of plot. You need to establish some kind of setting, some kind of characterization that you might not otherwise have, right? That's unique to an imaginative piece. You've got to have some kind of plot. But it doesn't have to be a significant plot. It's just one moment in time. I would make that moment in time relevant to, I would actually frame it in a way so that you can easily segue into what you wanted to talk about with the discursive. But one thing I would say is I would probably try and be a little bit more careful and deliberate about the way that I link what I wanted to say in my discursive back to the setting that you established in the first paragraph, right? So you have a new opening that clearly makes it sound like an imaginative. You're using lots of imagery. You're describing the setting. I know where your character is, okay? But then you segue into like how they're reflecting on a particular issue or something, right? So make sure you transition from a real world setting, a physical setting. You transition from that into the character's thoughts if your discursive is about their contemplation of something, and then every now and then bring it back to that real life setting that you established at the beginning. So like maybe they awaken from their thoughts because of the sound of the birds outside or something, right? Like something like that. Think about a premise that kind of makes sense with what you want to talk about, but make sure that you're occasionally going back to the outside world so that you can still engage with the imagery and the setting so that it is a bit more believable as an imaginative. Okay, so that's all I would add. I would say it's probably not enough just to have the start. Try and have a couple of moments. They only have to be little moments. They're just little one-liners or not one-liners, but 1 to 3 sentences maybe that occasionally you incorporate throughout that just shows the character going in and out of their thoughts. Okay, so when they're out of their thoughts, there's something on the outside world that's happening that should probably connect to what they're thinking about or how they're feeling. Try and match the environment that you portray to the character's feelings. Okay, so that would be my only advice there, just to add a little bit more. I know it's a little bit more effort. That sucks, but that's going to be what you want to have to be prepared for that. Okay, otherwise it's not going to sound authentic, and it would affect your overall mark. Okay, but good to have a discursive. The discursive translates to the persuasive very easily. You just need to make it more definitive, higher modality. Make sure you're not using things like perhaps, maybe, I thought about this. It's more assertive and you're stating something, right? Use a little bit more repetition than you otherwise would. Use a rhetorical question or two in your opening paragraph for the persuasive. Okay, engage the reader directly. You might do that in your discursive already, but saying you and your, using those second person pronouns is going to help. Okay. Now, as imaginative, in case I get forced into writing imaginative. Yeah. So that's what we're prepared for. All good. There was one other question. Guys, bear with me. We're going to look at the breakdowns in 1 second. I just want to make sure I've answered all of your questions. Angelina, if you're still with us? How to prepare for Mod C creative writing if you don't know what the question will be? Well, you can still have a base draft. And I think as I just went through, you want to have a base discursive piece, for instance, okay? They already asked specifically for an imaginative 3 years ago. What I suspect they might do this year, this is pure speculation, so don't be led astray by my hypothesis. All I would suggest is that they might give you an option of two things, and it could be between discursive or persuasive, or they might do discursive and imaginative. They might specifically ask for persuasive, but if you've already prepared a discursive, it translates so easily to persuasive that I think the whole game is really preparing for the discursive and imaginative. And of course, you should consider how you would change your discursive to a persuasive. But I think having a discursive base that can, and then you practice adapting that to a persuasive mode is the way to go. You don't need to have a separate persuasive. And then you really do need to put a little bit more thought into the imaginative and think, okay, how would I create a setting and a bit of a plot so that I could incorporate what I want to talk about in my discursive into the imaginative? So you can definitely have a base draft. To your point about not knowing what the question is, make sure that when you build that draft, that it's based very closely on the prescribed text that you studied in Module C. Okay? That's how you're going to be able to be more adaptable to the kinds of questions that come up, because some questions might require you to use a character from the prescribed text. Okay? They might actually require you to use a setting from the prescribed text. And you want to have already done that in your draft so that you can easily address that. Whereas if you just create a completely random piece of writing that isn't based on the same ideas or concerns of the text that you studied in Module C, that's going to be a lot harder. Okay, so make sure that you base your draft piece, again, discursive or imaginative, there are good ones to prepare as a base, and then you create the variations for the other ones. They should all be about the same idea and concern. You don't have to create 3 different pieces that are about 3 different ideas. You should have one idea and you explore it in the 3 different modes of writing: imaginative, discursive, persuasive. Okay. And I think I have some other videos out there on this in terms of how to think about that preparation process, but start by using your preferred form out of discursive and imaginative. Pick whatever your favorite is out of those 2. Create a draft that is about a similar idea, a similar concern, right? A similar moment as your prescribed text that you're basing your style of writing on. Okay. So a lot of people will study a prescribed Module C text, and then all that they'll do is they'll use a couple of techniques that the composer used in that text, but they won't write about a similar thing. I think you should write about a similar thing. You can present it in a different way. You can put your own twist on it. I think that's important, but I actually would say stick close to what they were on about. It doesn't have to be the exact same thing, but just something related in case a very specific question comes up. That's the first point about, how do you prepare for it in that way? You prepare for it so that it's going to be pretty adaptable to what those Module C questions could be. The second way to prepare is to actually get your drafts and practice, doing a whole bunch of questions. So you actually face the music there and you say, look, if I'm in the exam with my pre-prepared drafts for imaginative, discursive, persuasive, how would I actually deal with this kind of question? How would I deal with a visual stimulus if I got this kind of image? Give yourself the worst case scenarios and then force yourself to deal with it in terms of adapting what you had to that question. You also have to interpret the stimulus very broadly. So Angelina, if you're still watching this, watch my video on how to adapt a Module C text to any question, because there's a certain way of thinking about it that's required so that you don't kind of box yourself in and think, oh, I have to interpret the stimulus in this way, so now my piece is completely irrelevant. It's probably not irrelevant. You're probably just not interpreting the stimulus in the right way. So you want to make the stimulus work for your draft. Don't make your draft work for the stimulus, okay? The stimulus, the question that you get, works for you. You have to find a way to interpret it so that it actually still works and applies to your pre-prepared draft. And then you have to make adaptations, of course, and changes to make it clear that you're answering that question and responding to that stimulus. You make those throughout as you go. And that's why you make sure you have plenty of time to spare and make sure that your draft is not too long. So you time it out, make sure you can do the whole Module C section in 30 minutes, I would say even. So you have a bit of extra reserve time in case the essays take a bit longer than expected. 30 minutes to do the whole Module C, including the reflection. So about 14 to 15 minutes for a shorter version of the composition, and then 13, 14, 15 minutes for a reflection. And then you might also have some other sections in mind. If you get asked a 20 marker, you could get a 20 mark composition and then not be asked to do a reflection. In that case, you want to have some other material to include so that your answer is a bit longer. So you might also be familiar with that. Okay, Angelina, awesome. Yeah, watch that video. That should help you a lot. All right, let's pop back into this one, shall we? And we shall go from there. All right, so how do I get this? I'll get this into, there we go. Perfect. So here is, don't worry if you haven't done all of these texts, by the way. It's actually more about the principles. So it doesn't matter if you haven't studied Artists of the Floating World. You don't need to click off the video. I'm going to be looking at a lot of the most popular texts as well. And feel free to add more questions in the chat as I go through this. All I want to point out is things that you can do to improve the quality of your essays, okay? So here, I'm looking at an example from an Artist of the Floating World, okay? It doesn't matter that it's a text that you might not do. Let's see how they respond to the question in their very first sentence of the introduction. So the question is representations of human interactions, okay? Human interactions, that's a key word. You always want to underline in the exam, underline as soon as writing time starts, the 1, 2, maybe 3 key terms or phrases in the question, okay? Raise questions about individual motivation. Okay, so individual motivation is clearly the focus of the question, right? Representations of human interactions, raise questions about individual motivations. Okay, well, questions is also kind of key, but I would say what individual motivation to do what type of human interactions between who, and then I would say what are the kinds of questions that are raised about this. Okay, so they're the 3 key parts of that question. It's really important you practice doing this process of identifying the key parts of the question. So many students think, the word how is a key term of the question. It's not. Yes, it's an important word, but it's not the key term that you're going to have to keep using throughout your essay. These words are words that we have to keep using throughout our whole essay, especially in the introduction. Every sentence of the introduction, I want to include these questions. But here's the mistake this student has made. What have they done? They say it represents the questioning of individual motivations within human interactions. Okay, well, you think, oh, they've used all 3 keywords. That's awesome. They've just repeated the question, though. Hopefully you spotted that straight away. They have not said anything more specific than what this already said. They've just completely repeated the question. So already, to me, you're on like a band 3, band 4 maximum. I mean, it's not even band 3. It's the lower band you could be. I mean, I guess you could have someone who doesn't use the words of the question. So look, realistically, band 3, band 4, you're at if you do this kind of response. Okay? You could get up. You could kind of increase the quality and the mark of your response after this kind of sentence. But if all of your sentences were like this, that's just so vague. You haven't actually offered any insight. So be careful not to do what I think here is a warm-up sentence. This student has just started writing, right? They've just written this up as a warm-up. And then in their next sentence, which I'll show you in a second, they're probably going to be a lot more sophisticated and a lot more specific. That, therefore, should have been the sentence they started with. So this sentence shouldn't even be in there because it's just not specific enough and it's just repeating the question. If you were to keep this sentence, what you would want to do is tell me something specific about each of these terms. So it says that representations of human interactions. Well, human interactions, what's the question to ask yourself there? You need to ask yourself this: between who? Okay, and you can give a general answer for that, but at least tell me between who or what, right? Between who, what? It probably is who because it says human interactions, but it could be a human interaction. It could be an interaction between someone and something. Could be an ideology, right? Now, it also says it raises questions. Well, what types of questions? I don't know about represents the questioning. That kind of doesn't really work. So I might say like compels readers. That's like encourages readers to question. Now I've got to say something that they're questioning, something about individual motivations, what the legitimacy, validity, self-serving nature, we can say the self-serving. I'm just making these up, by the way. These are just things that you can fill in. I'm not saying these are the precise ones you would use for this, but hopefully you can see based on your own essays that you need to add something in there, right? The legitimacy, the self-serving nature of individual motivations to, to what? To do something, like a motivation to do what? But the student hasn't said what the motivation is. Of individual motivations to kind of justify one's past within a of antagonistic present. I mean, that's kind of to do with this text, so I'm just using that as an example. And then I would have to rethink about the human interactions part, right? It compels, um, yeah, of human to justify one's past as they interact. There we go. As they interact with an antagonistic present. So you don't have to keep saying, this is another problem students make as well. They see human interactions and they try and reuse that phrase every time. But because that's a really bulky phrase, like it's 2 words, it's interactions, it's you're going to be kind of limited. You're going to find it hard to say something specific if you use those precise words. So you actually want to use derivatives of the key term. So interact is sufficient. And I think that allows a lot more flexibility with being specific about the question. So be flexible by using derivatives of the words of the question. Don't use synonyms, use the actual word, but interact and interaction, they're the same word. It's not like I'm using a synonym for interact, like relate to or merge, unite. I'm not using a different word for interact. Or communicate, right? I'm not using one of those words. I'm using interact, but I'm not saying human interactions every time because that's going to really make it difficult for me to weave it in a really sophisticated way. So hopefully you took note of that particular point. Now we've also got of individual motivations to justify one's past. So I've tried to relate these key terms together, but I've expanded on each one. So notice that after you use each key term of the question, you need to actually ask yourself a mini question on top. So the best questions to ask yourself about a key term. So here you saw that we had human interactions. You're going to ask yourself between who? Between who and what? Who and or what? Ask yourself a question that you have to answer in that particular example. Let me just pull this question off. There we go. All right. So human interactions between who and what? Raise questions. What questions? What are we questioning? Well, we said we're questioning the legitimacy. So we actually did say something that we are questioning. Okay, so what questions? What are we questioning? And then we also had individual motivation. The obvious question there is what motivation and whose motivation? And why do they have that motivation? Okay, so just like that, you can see if you can quickly brainstorm these kind of things in relation to each key term of the question, you are going to be you're in a much better position to say something insightful in that first sentence rather than something generic. Now, if you're struggling to incorporate all of the 3 key terms here in the question, just aim to use 1 or 2 of them and then use the next one in the next sentence, okay? But I would definitely say if you have 3 kind of key terms or phrases, try and specifically deal with them in the first 2 sentences of the essay, but make sure you've at least got 1 to 2 in the very first sentence because that's setting the impression in the marker's mind. Let's have a look at their next sentence. So we've dealt with that first one. We know how we're going to improve that. Look what they say next. They say, Ishiguro explores the generational division propelled from the changing culture of new political values and morals. Okay, so there's a big idea coming here. This is a lot more specific as well. But from what I can see, it doesn't actually include one of those key terms of the question. So this sentence is lacking that completely. So I'm going to remove the other part there. If we just focus on this sentence, right, you can see how it doesn't include any of those key terms. And again, we'll go back up here, get the statement. This is what you always want to be using as your reference point. Say you've got a memorized essay. We need to make sure that if we memorize this sentence, we can now use at least 2 out of the 3 key terms here in this sentence, okay? You can't overuse the key terms of the question. So keep using those. So Ishiguro explores the generational division. Okay, that's specific, which is good. But propelled by, it would be by, the changing culture of new political values and morals. I mean, see how they've said values and morals? I bet all of you watching right now, go through your essays and you're going to see tons of examples where you have doubled up on words that basically mean the same thing. See this? Values and morals. Like, you don't need to have the double up. It's more impactful just to say one thing. Okay, so try and remember that. What we do here is we would get rid of one of those, okay? You can pick which one, but don't double up words, especially in the introduction. The most sophisticated responses just say one thing. They say one idea, but they really expand on it. They don't have all of these double up words that basically are the same thing, okay? They don't list. So we want to get rid of the listing. So you can see a good example of it there. We can easily remove that, and now it's a little bit more succinct. It's a little bit more impactful. That reflect Ishiguro's contextual ideology of Thatcherism, okay, among society in Britain. Now, I don't know if his contextual ideology is Thatcherism. See, like these are more specific points that I won't go into here because I know not everyone studies this text, but it's more like responding to Thatcherism. But there were also progressivism emerging. So I would say it's a more mixed. There's a clash of ideologies in this time. It's not like it's just Ishiguro is a Thatcherite or anything like that. I really I actually don't think that. I think he's just reflecting a contextual clash. So this, you could get caught out here. Obviously markers know the text that the essay they're reading is based upon. So make sure that you're quite precise with those kind of things. You're also saying a lot in this sentence, but make sure we get the keywords into that sentence. Here's an example of how you could do that. Ishiguro explores the generational division. Now, human interactions. Can everyone see how generational division relates to human interactions? The interaction, right? The divided interactions, the fragmented interactions between generations, right? Like that is saying the exact same thing as generational division, but I've reworded it in a way that hits the question directly. And I've said the type. Notice how I've said interactions, or explores the fragmented interaction between past and present generations. Look at that. Look how specific that is. It's a fragmented interaction. I haven't just said human interactions. I've said a fragmented one. So I've asked myself a very important question, which is what type? You guys should be asking yourself that question all throughout. What type? What type? What type? And then you fill that in with the relevant knowledge that you have. Hopefully your essays will already have something specific on that. But we want to say something here really specific, okay, in addition to the keyword itself, which is interaction or interacts or interactions or interactional, or maybe not interactional, but you get my point, a derivative of that word. So Ishiguro explores the fragmented interaction between past and present generations. There are the two groups of people. Fantastic. Now what we're doing is we're engaging with this word of the question here, but we're doing it in a meaningful way because we're asking the right questions and we're actually defining that answer. So we're saying, okay, interactions between who? Between past and present generations. Well, I already had generational division. The student already had the answer to that question. They already had the material to help them expand upon those key terms, but a lot of students don't realize that they have the answer already there. And this is also why you memorize essays, because if you've memorized it, a lot of the material you've memorized, you can use to fill the blanks there, to actually help you expand on the key words, just like we have here. This person already talked about a division. That's why I said fragmented. So I used division, fragmented interaction, or divided interaction. And then I said between who? Well, it says generational. So between past and present generations. Okay, great. Propelled by, and now we can go into all of this, the new, a change in culture, or propelled by the progressive motivation to, propelled by progressivist or progressive motivations to change the culture with, I'm not going to bother with, I would probably refine these a bit further, but you can see like progressive motivations, what type of motivations here? Well, these are progressive because you want change. So I'm just using a word that is to do with what we were already saying, the student already was saying, trying to change the culture. So we could actually say by culturally progressive motivations. Look at that. That even sounds better. So I'm saying propelled by culturally progressive motivations in the wake of, Thatcherism, et cetera. We can probably get rid of all of that. I just think it's getting a bit clunky as well. It probably needs a comma somewhere, or you can introduce context at the start. So all of the all of the context stuff, guys, if in your introductions, everyone can apply this feedback. You can actually say, responding to the Thatcherism, Ishiguro explores, we can say the context point there, and then we can actually end the sentence there. So we can move this up here. Okay, but I would probably word it in a slightly different way. But look at that. Look how much we've engaged with motivations, interaction. And the best thing about this, hopefully what you all took from this, is I have used all of the material that this student would have memorized. And I've used it and I've just weaved it in. I've just reworded it. Okay, so really useful thing there is to have that memorized information and then practice looking at different questions like this and practice expanding on those key terms of the question like I've just shown you there. Remember, you want to be flexible with it as well, but notice that I'm not using synonyms. I'm using the exact words. So we can go back to this one. Look at our new start for this student. Do an improved first two sentences. Bam. How's the marker feeling after they read this? They're impressed. They're really impressed. They're thinking this student is very comprehensively breaking down all of the key terms in the question we've asked. They're answering the question. This is not a pre-prepared essay. Of course, it was memorized, but you're writing effectively a fresh essay off the back of that memorized essay. And that's the point. Teachers only tell you not to memorize because they're afraid you won't do what I'm showing you here. You're just going to go and write the exact same one. And you will be tempted to write the exact same one if you haven't timed out your essay and you think you've got a really long essay and you're trying to say too much. If you know that you've got time to spare, you won't be afraid to spend some time thinking about these deconstructions like I'm showing you and thinking about how you can reword each sentence to incorporate at least one or two of the key terms in a question. Okay, hopefully that is helpful. I'm going to skip that. Let's go to another one. Anyone doing 1984 here? So this is a this is a human experiences question here. Okay, text and human experiences. Here we go. Explain how 1984 explores individual and collective human experiences. Okay, so what are the keywords there? Well, individual and collective. It's a pretty basic one. I'd be surprised if you got something this general, but to be fair, I did see a question that just talked about personal and shared nature of human experiences, although I think that question also had storytelling in there as well, where you need to engage with the form. If a question asks you about storytelling, let's make a special note here. Everyone should be noting this down. If a question asks you about storytelling, they're really wanting you to engage with the form of the text. E.g., with this one, it's like this is a dystopian fiction novel. It's also speculative. It's a speculative novel. It's futuristic. All of these things are to do with, these things are to do with the genre as well, but it's a dystopian prose fiction novel. Like it's written as a novel, but other elements that are a little bit broader than just the form, or a little bit more specific, I should say, to do with the genre, the fact that it is speculative, the fact that it has, it features, a pastiche in there. It's got Goldstein's manual. It's got various other elements. What about the structure? That's to do with the form, how the text has been built. It's a tripartite structure. It's got three parts. So that's tripartite. It kind of makes sense, right? Tri is three, partite, three parts. Tripartite structure. That's where you talk about all of those things. And you talk about, the narrative voice. Here it's third person limited narration. Okay, that's the voice. That informs the way we read the novel. So that's all to do with the way that the story is told. So these are the kind of considerations you should have if you get a word like storytelling in the question for the common module. Okay, so the key terms for this particular question are individual and collective human experiences. So obviously we immediately ask ourselves, what are the individual human experiences? And what are the collective experiences? And that also goes with and what type. Like you can actually use an adjective to talk about those. Are they oppressive experiences? Are they liberating experiences? So I always ask myself what and what type, always for those kinds of questions. And this is the other thing to consider that only the best students will consider. So everyone watching this now is going to consider this, right? Because you're trying to be the best you can be in this exam. And when we're thinking about, what those individual experiences are and what are the collective, this is the thing that a lot of students miss. They don't consider how are the two related? How are individual experiences affected by collective experiences? They don't consider the relationship between the keywords. Students will just The worst thing you can do, other than not answer the question at all and not use the words of the question, is to actually use these two words together in your essay. Because you've got two different keywords there, individual and collective, I should never see those two words together in your response. It's up to you to separate them. We must separate these and then relate them together. Okay, so tell me what the individual experience is, tell me what the collective experience is, and then tell me how they relate to one another. Okay, that is going to be what the best students do. Best students will separate, define, and relate. Okay, they'll separate, define, and relate. Now, individual and collective, separate these. What do I mean by relating them together? Well, obviously, if you have a collective experience of oppression, and notice how I'm using this word here, of oppression, that's a really useful word to help you expand on the key terms of the question. You have a collective experience of oppression that inhibits, it stops, it prevents an individual experience of freedom. Boom. So it inhibits, it slows down. There is our relationship phrase. Look at that. That inhibits an individual experience of freedom. So that's an example, a general example of how you can build a relationship between two key words that sit next to each other in the question, but that should never sit next to each other in your answer. Okay, so we have a collective experience of oppression. Of, so important there because it forces you to do the right thing and actually give me the example of what it is. Because the question hasn't said oppression, you have to tell me it's oppression. Or conformity, is another good one. The collective experience of conformity, again, of, so key, inhibits an individual experience of freedom. We can even just get rid of that for the purpose of this. So a collective experience of conformity inhibits an individual experience of freedom. The of, again, forces us to say something specific. Look here, we're saying something meaningful. We're saying something meaningful because we're saying of after the key terms of the question, but we've still engaged with each of those key words. You see, this kind of breakdown is what you should all be doing for your own answers after you do a practice answer to a different kind of question. If anyone has any questions on what I've been through so far, please put it in the chat. If it's all making sense, just give me some feedback on whether this is resonating with you or not. Is this making sense, what I'm saying? Let's continue on and look at this student's actual answer, and we'll see how we can quickly improve it. Our comprehension of the world arises due to collective and individual human experiences. Oof. What have they done there? What have they done? This is no good. I shouldn't say that. I mean, that's harsh feedback, but it's no good in the sense of it's violated our principle of never grouping the two words together that are the key terms. Look at that. Due to collective and individual. They haven't even separated them. They haven't told me what the collective one is and what the individual one is. I get why you might not want to say what it is because you think, oh, it's too specific. It's too soon. Well, just tell me on a general level. Like, again, conformity, oppression. They're things that clearly relate to the whole text in 1984. Or if you're talking about the Crucible, a lot of you might be doing the Crucible, that will also apply to that. Okay, so these are very general terms that then you can get more specific on and talk about, the main character and their struggle. You can talk about that in the sentences that follow, but I think you should still say something specific in this first sentence. So that's where this student can really improve. They need to separate this and frame this sentence as a relationship. Okay, they need to frame this sentence as a relationship, and the mirroring phenomena in our environment is just so vague. I have no idea what they mean by that. Okay, I mean, yeah, I don't really understand that. It's not clear at all, and it's very vague language. So everything in there is too vague. Now they have used the words of the question, but they've repeated them, and then they've offered something that is really vague in addition to the question. So again, it's still only around that band 4 range. If you want to go to band 5 and 6, you want to hit those 80s and 90s, especially obviously we're looking at 90s to high 90s. You need to come out with a strong statement that explores the relationship. Okay, so the collective experience. Again, you could be better than this. You could be more specific than this. I'm doing this as a basic example that would potentially be at that band 6 level as long as you follow up with the right things. But if you come out with something very specific, like George Orwell's 1984 explores the collective experience of conformity as inhibiting an individual experience of freedom, nice and concise. I see how you're interpreting the question. You've separated the terms. Beautiful. Give me some more in the next sentence. Bring in context, bring in form. We're on our way to a band 6. Okay, this is found to be emblematic. I don't really have a big issue with that introduction of the text. That's fine as long as you say something specific. You come out with a sentence like this, and then you follow it up with this. Okay, no worries. This is found to be emblematic, or this is represented in. The other thing is fine as well. This is emblematic in, that's just personal preference really as to what works. George Orwell's dystopia, I would say dystopian fiction novel. Be more specific with the form there, okay? That student only had dystopia. So they only had that. So we want to cross that out. And we want to replace it with something a lot more specific about what the text type is and the genre there. So dystopian fiction novel, perfect. That sounds a lot more sophisticated. It's a lot more formal and professional. You don't have to do this bit. What you can do is do the date, publication, and then say after it. This one does look funny because there's 2 dates because of the title of the novel. But you can say henceforth 1984. So I'm going to be, whenever I'm referring to this novel 1984, I'm going to be calling it by these digits 1984, so I don't have to keep writing out the full title, which is here in proper words. So 1984. When you guys write a text in your essay, it should be underlined. Okay. This is represented in that, henceforth that, which captures how, again, it should be a comma there, which captures how a struggle to retain humanity. Well, again, if we'd want to say like something to do with individual, right? So humanity, like let's say individual autonomy, results from regimes that seek to collectively dehumanize, right? That actively dehumanize the collective experience rather than to propagate itself. As a mode of self-propagation or something, I guess, if you wanted to say the propagation thing, right? That results from, there we go. So that actively dehumanize the collective experience. Now, I didn't actually say what type of collective experience. We said it's dehumanizing the collective experience, right? But results from it that actively dehumanize. I guess we're saying dehumanize the collective experience. So we are saying something specific about it. We haven't really said what that experience is, although we are implying that it's an experience of dehumanization, right? So that we could probably get away with that one, right? In terms of defining it. I think the dehumanize kind of speaks to the specific type. So that would be fine. And then we have that. In particular, Orwellian protagonist Winston Smith this is a bit funny. Orwellian protagonist Winston Smith's concern over retaining his ability to posit consciousness. To posit consciousness. I don't know about posit. I think that word's not correct, but to retain consciousness or to heighten consciousness or to exercise his consciousness, his awareness, right? Or heighten. Signifies Orwell's warning. Well, it doesn't signify his warning. It allows Orwell to warn, to caution readers, right, about the fragility of human freedom. Okay, sure. But then again, we would want to get individual and collective somewhere in those sentences. It's actually a pretty easy question because everything you basically write about will relate to something to do with the individual or something to do with the collective. Just make sure you're separating those out over time. Nomo, I don't have an example from All the Light We Cannot See at this point. So apologies for that. Feel free to email through or fill out one of the forms that we've sent out in the past with one of your sample essays, or not a whole essay, obviously, but send through like a thesis statement based on a question or a body paragraph, and we can then break those down for you. But you'll have to send that through using one of your examples. Okay, but yeah, don't send a full essay. In terms of Mod A, textual conversation, how do you prepare for Module A, textual conversations? Well, you prepare by memorizing, by perfecting, timing, and memorizing a draft essay and then practicing adapting that essay to several different types of questions to the point where you're able to effectively create a new essay on the day, a fresh essay on the day, but you're doing it in a realistic way where, because you only have 40 minutes, you're drawing upon the memorized material to create something fresh using the skill set that you've also developed by practicing adapting that to different questions. Okay, so that the way you prepare for a mod essay is the same as other ones. You create a draft essay. The draft essay might be 3 body paragraphs. It might be 4. With a lot of the students that I'm taking on at the moment, we actually have been moving from 4 to 3 in order to get them done in 32 to 34 minutes. Module A is a really bulky, very dense kind of module. You have a lot to cover. So even if it takes you 34, 35 minutes, that's okay. I would go up to 35 maybe and make sure my module C is even shorter than 32. That's why I aim for like 30 minutes or less for the whole of the module C. So that gives you a little bit more time. You can buy time from mod C, right? And give it to mod A. So you can have a little bit longer on mod A, maybe 35, maximum 36 minutes. I'd say 36, you're cutting it a bit fine. But even to do it in 35 minutes, I found that with a lot of my students, they had more time in their internal assessments. But now that they've only got that 40-minute window, and we want to get that draft done in no more than really 35 minutes, it's better to just take the last 2 paragraphs, if you've got a 4-body paragraph structure, and just merge them as the last one. So you have like, the first text, the second text, and then you have a paragraph on both texts. That can work really well, and that's going to reduce a lot of words for you and allow you to have more time on the day to answer the question. So, and you won't run out of time that way, okay? And you won't, otherwise you'll write the whole essay and you would have taken like 50 minutes, and then you've dug into a lot of the time that you have for the next essay. And then if you take the same amount of time on the next essay, you only have 30 minutes for mod C, and then you might run out of time and not answer the stimulus or the question properly. So you can see how all of that happens if you don't get the mod A timing right. It has this ripple effect. It affects everything thereafter. And you should do paper 2 in order, by the way. Okay, let's pull this back up. Let's have a look at another one. Here's a crucible topic sentence. Miller condemns the corruptibility of ideological power structures that perpetuate injustice. I mean, I like that start. Ultimately instigating individual rebellion in reevaluating collective morality. See, they lost me in the last bit. The start was so solid. Miller condemns the corruptibility of ideological power structures that perpetuate injustice. I don't think you need this bit. I don't think this bit really makes sense in the way it's worded. I understand that Miller is calling for a kind of rebellion, but he's not. It's not. And obviously, the character of Proctor in this text embodies that rebellious potential and the need for rebellion. I don't know if instigates might not be the word, right? It definitely provokes rebellion, and it provokes rebellion through the assertion of individual morality versus a collective morality. So I get the points here are like almost there. I think you've just got to word it slightly differently, but I would actually end it there, and at the start of the sentence add a clause like through something to do with the form, right, or through the character arc, through the anomalous character arc. Try and use text and human experiences terms, like from the rubric. Go and look at the rubric. Make sure you've got rubric terms throughout your common module essay, and try and incorporate those where you can in a specific way, though. Don't just use them for no reason, and don't lump them together either. Notice here I'm using the word anomaly, but I'm using it in terms of the character arc of John Proctor. So through the anomalous, notice I'm using it in a flexible way because I want to be able to use it effectively. Through the anomalous character arc of John Proctor, Miller condemns the corruptibility, right? So there you go. You say something specific about the text, but not too specific that it's going to be limiting. And you can also say like, the anomalous of the tragic hero or something like that, of the tragic hero, John Proctor. You can add something even more specific. I'm just getting a little bit more specific, that me talking about a general character arc is not meaning that I'm going to have to like restrict a lot of my evidence within that body paragraph. So I'd probably get rid of this for now, or at least try and reevaluate that. I think this was their student's topic sentence. I guessed that. It may have been something in their introduction, but you can see that sometimes it's good to just say how and then why. So this is what Miller's doing, right? He's written the play to condemn. This is why he's done it. He's trying to condemn the corruptibility, but how did he do it? Through the anomalous character. I gave a general example that relates to what I want to talk about in the paragraph of how he did that. So we've got how and why. And if you just follow a how and why structure in topic sentences, you're often on the right kind of path. Okay. So that's something you can all think about. How, and you talk about form or an example of something, form, character, maybe. Form's a good one though. How, and then why slash what. What is explored? Why is it explored? You can even just do how, comma, what plus why. Right? Through the anomalous character arc of that, okay, that's how. Miller condemns the corruptibility. Okay, that is what. And then the why they had was here. So we could actually add Miller condemns the corruptibility that perpetuate injustice in order to, this is the why now, heighten collective consciousness. So it's a pretty generic phrase here. We could be more specific there, but I just wanted to show you the why there. So you look at the three elements in this topic sentence. If you can hit these, then you've covered a lot of ground. So really nice structure for your topic sentences and general sentences of analysis is how, what, plus why, okay? And how, again, is that why might be, it may be to do with context, it may be to do with the authorial intent. What were they intending? Here, authorial intent is invoked. We haven't said anything specifically about the context of this play, but we could, but instead we've done authorial intent. So they're the components there, actually. That's a really, I don't know if I've actually worded it like that before. I'm quite happy with that. How plus what plus why. That's a powerful kind of framework that you can use when you go through all of your topic sentences, right? Try and mix up the way that you word it so you're not constantly saying through. You might do them in a different order, but they're the components that you basically want in each topic sentence if possible, okay? Cool, hope that helps. Merchant of Venice. Anyone do merchant? Again, it doesn't matter if you do it or not. This will actually be really helpful for you. I'm going to do this as an example of a body paragraph now. So I've talked to you a little bit about, topic sentences, the start of the body paragraph. I've talked to you about thesis statement, how to adapt to the question. Let's finish off with a body paragraph example so you can see how you can really go through and compress your analysis, because I feel like a lot of people just write way more than they need to. So when you're dealing with a body paragraph, let's have a look at the components. And again, what I would recommend you all do, please pay attention to this piece of advice. Go to all of your body paragraphs and look at how I do this. The first thing I do when I look at the students is I go, boom, okay, that one's your topic sentence. I go, okay, this is going to be your first piece of analysis. And then thereafter, I'm just spacing out each sentence. This is what I was talking about before, because I want to be able to isolate them and see how many sentences it's taking to make each point. I only need 3 to 4 points. Say this is 3 body paragraphs, this essay, which I would recommend for the common mod and module B, potentially module A, unless you're a really fast writer, in which case you might be able to do 4 bodies. But assuming you're doing 3 body paragraphs for your essays, you're aiming for about 4 points, 4 pieces of analysis within each one, 3 if you're a slow writer, or slower. I wouldn't say it means you're that slow, but a slower writer might only be able to do 3 main points. But what you can see I'm doing here is I'm splitting up all the sentences because I want to be able to very easily distinguish between each point and each quote. Okay, it's going to allow you to see things better. I believe they actually had more here, so I'm actually just taking the first half of theirs. It was way too long, but you would then, of course, at the end have a link sentence. So for those asking, can I go through a body paragraph? This is an example of it. They did have other pieces of evidence there, so I don't want to misrepresent their response, but it was too long. It wouldn't have to be any longer than this. Look at this. That's already 180 words. I mean, once you have a link sentence, you're looking at 200. Again, 200 to 250 if you're doing 3 bodies, but the word count doesn't really mean anything. It's all about how fast you can write it. So that's why you have to time it yourself. Only you know how much you can write to get within that 32 to 34 minute threshold. Okay, so have a look at the first sentence here. Shylock embodies a complete set of different human experiences from those of Bassanio and Antonio, so very specific character references, not always a bad thing, and particularly embodies the ideas of hatred and vengeance. Look at that, the ideas of hatred and vengeance. We don't like that because it's just listing, and you're also telling me about ideas. I know there are ideas in this play. I know there are ideas in all of the texts. That's why you're doing an essay on it. You don't need to tell me the ideas. You just need to tell me what they are. So really what you wanted to say there was it embodies hatred and vengeance. So the first step is don't use words like themes, ideas. Just tell me what they are. The second point, and I wonder if people can see this, what's the problem with this particular part here? Hatred and vengeance. You're just listing two words that don't mean anything. Hatred, vengeance. You're not telling me anything about either of them, and you've also lumped them together. So here we have the famous problem, which I bet a lot of you watching have done, right? That's just because it's a very common mistake, is you've got list in. And what list in does is it makes you think you've said more than you have. So this student has said hatred and vengeance. They're like, oh, yep, I've talked about a few things or a couple of things here in this topic sentence. It's like, you've actually talked about nothing. You've just told me two buzzwords that I don't really know what you want to say about them. So don't list. Choose one idea. Choose one idea. You haven't even got an idea there. You've just got not a buzzword. Okay. We need an idea, a fleshed out idea. Okay. And we need one idea that you can flesh out and expand on. Okay. Because hatred is not an idea. That's just a theme word and it doesn't tell me anything. Okay. Hopefully that's making sense to you. So if we're going to say it embodies hatred and vengeance, I mean, yeah, I don't really want either of those. I want you to tell me something about it, right? You've said here it embodies a complete set of different human. I mean, do you mean inconsistent? Different is problematic as well. If we go back, I don't know about a complete set. I think you've also used embodies twice. Look at these things. Like these are just little technical things that it's like, okay, we can easily tidy this up. So let's have a look underneath to see if I can just use what they've got here just to make this a lot cleaner. Okay, so the edit of this, and notice how I do the edit because you can do this yourselves. Instead of, Shylock embodies a complete set. I don't like complete, as I said. I would just go straight into different because it's all about being concise. What is complete set? Why is that necessary? Okay, it almost sounds a little bit informal. So Shylock represents, now do I want different? Different problematic, inconsistent, paradoxical? I would say inconsistent because that's a rubric term. That's way better than different. Different isn't in the rubric. So Shylock represents inconsistent human experiences. Or rather, we should say, Shylock is subject to inconsistent human experiences when, like, I kind of don't like the framing of the whole sentence. It's just like problematic for me, just the way it's just so character based, and it's like they have different human experiences to that character. It's like you're not really saying anything specific there. You could say through, again, I'm going to go through, but you wouldn't overuse this. It's just through the kind of paradoxical, through the paradoxical emotions of, or the paradoxical experiences of, now we say it's victimhood and vengeance, right? Through the paradoxical experiences of, racial, of social alienation or racial ostracization, or we could even say like social alienation. And, private vengeance or something like that. The paradoxical experiences of social alienation and private vengeance, Shylock embodies the potential, right, for victim to become villain. I mean, I'm just going to do it there. I just think that's already a lot stronger because it's saying one specific point. It's sharp. Embodies the potential for victim to become villain, right? For the victim. Now I'm using victim. The reason why that it's going to suggest to put S's on, but for victim to become villain, it's more for dramatic effect. I think it still makes sense that way. Now, are these experiences paradoxical, being alienated and getting vengeance? I mean, maybe they're not. They are kind of antithetical because on one hand you're alienated, on the other hand you're actually getting revenge against someone. They're connected in some way. We have to use paradoxical quite broadly. You could argue there's probably a better word than paradoxical, but I'm just trying to engage with the rubric in that way. Okay. We could say like social victimhood and also, and being a villain, like being a victim and a villain, that's kind of paradoxical, isn't it? Embodies the power, for the victim, for a victim of racial prejudice. Let's build this. Let's build on it because the first draft's never the one you keep, right? It's never the one you keep. Shylock embodies the potential for a victim of racial prejudice to paradoxically become a villain, right? Then we'd say like through his kind of anomalous characterization within Shakespeare's play. Now, we could do a lot better with that. I'm just doing a pretty general one there, but notice I'm getting rid of this bit now. I actually don't like it. It wasn't quite paradoxical enough for me. I think the paradox is how a victim is villain. So we were on the right track there. I'm thinking aloud as I go through this, and I think I'll stick with that one for now, right? Good. So if your thing is mainly about Shylock and how he compares to other characters, we can bring in the other characters within the body. We don't have to flag them in the topic sentence as well. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to all of you. That's how you could improve a topic sentence, right? Be more concise. Don't group buzzwords like hatred and vengeance together. Don't list. Flesh out an idea. Be nice and concise, and then move on, right? Move on to your evidence. Let's see if evidence comes in. You can see it doesn't come in. So for those watching who have too many words, if you've timed out your essays and it's taken you too long and you need to cut things out, practice getting a quote in the first sentence after your topic sentence. Because here, this student has another sentence where, look what they're saying. They're repeating what they had in the topic sentence. Hate and vengeance. We just said hatred and vengeance here. Hate and vengeance, the grammar and stuff is off as well, but we will ignore those things. Hate and vengeance are explored through Shylock. We just said that up there, right? So very repetitive, and that's what will happen here. A Jew in the play who is consistently portrayed. Now it's like a Jew in the play. You're just storytelling now. You're just telling me about the characters. You're not actually analyzing them, right? So, characterized as a hindrance to harmony throughout the play. Yeah, okay, a threat to the harmony. Okay, I get that. That's not bad as an idea, but you would have to get evidence to back that up and integrate into that same sentence. So the idea isn't bad there. You can see that this is very repetitive there. So we would definitely want to eliminate that. And again, my aim in restructuring this would just be to focus on my first quote and link it to something to do with the context. Some people don't like this generic phrase, but like the anti-Semitism or something, reflecting the. I'm going to start with a contextual clause because I haven't got that in the topic sentence yet. And I find after the topic sentence, if you haven't referred to context, it's always good to lead with something about context, followed by a comma, and then your first piece of evidence that matches that. Okay, so that's a really practical technique that you can all take on board. So reflecting the anti-Semitic means like anti-Jewish, basically, attitudes of Venetian society. Again, so quite a generic phrase. I'm just using it as a basic example. Perhaps the best students won't actually even run that argument about anti-Semitism, but hopefully this just gives you an idea of how to structure the sentence. So I'm saying reflecting the something of Venetian society. Okay, so that is a contextual statement. Now we want to bring in a quote. So you can see the first quote that this student has is here. You call me a misbeliever, cutthroat dog, and spat upon my Jewish gabardine. Okay, well, where's the technique? Maybe there's one after. I'm looking for a technique now. If you use a quote like that, that's the focus of your analysis, I want to see a technique. Shylock faces mistreatment and adversity from others. Storytelling. You're storytelling. You're not linking it. It's not presented in an analytical framework. And then allows himself to become diminished. He's institutionally marginalized and persecuted for being a misbeliever. Now they're just reusing the quote. There are no techniques. There are no techniques. I mean, that's pretty crazy. I mean, you can't get above a band 4 without using technical analysis. So the good news for this student is they can, and I hope they see it. I mean, these were submitted some time ago. Some of these were submitted some time ago. So if I can actually get in touch with the people who I've done some edits for, I will, because I think they need to watch this. I mean, this student can very easily pick themselves up. They've got some ideas here, they've got some material, but they're taking so long to make one simple point, and they don't even have a technique in the sentence. So restructuring the sentence is absolutely key for this student. Reflecting the, okay, we're going to bring in context there. Great. What's the technique? I mean, we have got something. You call me a misbeliever, cutthroat dog. I mean, there you go, cutthroat dog. That's animalistic imagery, right? So we could try and get something, better than that, but I'm just going to use the quote I see there. You call me a misbeliever, cutthroat dog. It is a characterization. So kind of Shylock's the characterization, the dehumanizing, or what? Why don't we use that as the effect? The characterization of Shylock as a cutthroat, if that's the exact way it's written, cutthroat dog. Right? The characterization of Shylock as a cutthroat dog. Now I want to use the animalistic imagery, right? The use of animalistic imagery. Look, I'm doing this to characterize Shylock as a cutthroat dog. Look at that. Look at that improvement. The use of animalistic imagery to characterize Shylock as a cutthroat dog. Look how the quote just seamlessly flows in, right? Seamlessly flows in. There's not like a comma and then the quote. I've tried to incorporate it so that it flows. You want your quotes to flow. So you play around with the quotes. You're probably using a lot more of the quote than you even need. Look, that's the quote I'm using. 2 words. Look at the original quote. Like, we don't need all of that. We could incorporate this kind of spitting on the Jewish Garbadine, but and hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. But we can incorporate that later. We don't need to group the whole quote together. Don't be afraid to split up your quote so that your sentences flow better. So we have here the use of animalistic imagery. So again, you can all go back on your work and just say, oh, maybe I need to just bring in the technique early. And if you can't find a technique, get a different quote or do some research on the quote. And I guarantee you'll find a sort, look at the Jettle resources. We have a platform. We have all the techniques laid out for every single quote that could be important. So remember, Jettle.com, we actually have built a platform that does all of this for you. Okay, so that's what that platform's there. If you haven't got access already, go into Jettle.com, make an account, get access to your texts. I mean, it's all this is all. There are examples of this. For about like 50, 100 pages sometimes for a text. Just plenty of examples of how to break these things down. Okay, so the use of animalistic imagery to characterize Shylock as a cutthroat dog kind of dehumanizes or reveals the extent of his dehumanization. Now, I'm saying dehumanization because he's being called a dog. So the word I'm using in the effect is really powerful because it clearly relates to the nature of the quote. So that's what's key. If you can have a word in your effect, in your explanation, that clearly matches to the substance of the quote that you're analyzing, then it's going to be very easy for the marker to see that, okay, this student knows how to analyze. They're actually drawing upon that quote and they're saying something insightful. Okay, so the use of animalistic imagery to characterize that, it reveals the extent of his dehumanization, right? As a Jew, right? As a Jew. And then, we can add something. I mean, that would be a very concise point. I don't know if we've said enough. Is that all we want to say? Reveals the extent of his I mean, that's pretty concise. It's a lot better than what we had. But we can actually start building our argument. So we can extend this and have a comma after it. Reveals the extent of his dehumanization as a Jew. Well, we're going to talk about how he becomes a villain, right? So it actually provokes a motivation, right? Provoking a motivation to exercise revenge, right? Provoking a motivation to exercise revenge on his, Christian adversaries. And thus, he's going to prove himself a villain. And thus, but I think prove myself a villain, I think that's a quote from another play, another Shakespearean play, prove myself a villain. Maybe that's Othello or something. Anyway, provoking a motivation to exercise revenge on his Christian adversaries and thus kind of embody like society think that he's like a dog, but then because they're treating him like that, ironically, he actually becomes like a villain, not like a dog, but he becomes less human, you could argue, because he's treated like a subhuman. So that's kind of the irony there, right? So and thus revenge and thus ironically, I think there's another really good quote about him, like, he's saying, "You call me this, therefore I will bark," or something. Like, "You call me dog, therefore I bark." So he's saying, like, I'm going to become what you think I am. Okay, to exercise revenge on Israel, and thus ironically transform into the very villain that they perceive him to be. Look, that's a deeper analysis. That's deeper analysis that takes some. You need to understand the play and what's going to come after. But I've tried to, do my direct effect. Notice how we quickly deal with the quote, "Cutthroat dog." Yep, he's dehumanized, and now I'm going to extend on that and provide something deeper. Oh, that's the thing that provokes the motivation. Okay, we're looking in this is our deeper, less direct analysis, and this bit's our direct analysis. So I always think about analysis in that way. Actually, you have a direct piece of analysis that clearly relates to the nature of the quote. Pay attention in particular to, you know, dog and dehumanization, being less human. And then what you do after is you can have a comma if you do this kind of structure, and have an extended point that's a little bit deeper that actually extrapolates from that direct point, that micro point, and you say something deeper about the play as a whole. And I think the best students are really good at doing that, at offering that additional insight. So you have here, you have a direct effect, plus you have a deeper insight. Okay, that's what you can see here. The direct effect is the bit in green that clearly links to the quote, and then the deeper insight about the play is in orange. Awesome. So then you just go through and you just repeat that, and you have that 4 times if you can do that in the time limit of 32 to 34 minutes. Even though technically you get 45 minutes for the common module essay, I would just treat it exactly the same as the other essays, that you get 40 minutes, because you might need 50 minutes for that section 1, especially if you get some text that you don't fully understand, or you need a bit more time to read through. So treat it like having 40 minutes, which means you'd have 32 to 34 minutes. If in 32 to 34 minutes you can get 4 of these kinds of sentences per paragraph for 3 paragraphs, great, do that. Otherwise, you would have 3 of them. It's whatever you can do in the time limit. Only you know how much you can write. Okay, great. So that's how you would go through your bodies. You would just make sure that the points keep building. And just like that, I think, there are a couple of other extra points that this student has made across all of these sentences. They start to bring in another thing here, like a pound of flesh. I think that's like a motif and it's symbolic. So you could have symbolism of that, and talk about that separately. But I would say for the most part, all of this we can just get rid of and replace it with that one sentence that we have there. Awesome. Any questions, guys? Hopefully that is helpful for you. There are some other responses. I will try and make some more time to go through some other student answers, but I just wanted to make sure I got through some key concepts on question adaptation, writing thesis statements, and how to structure your topic sentences and body paragraphs. And I think we covered some really good stuff there. So thank you so much for joining. Hopefully that was helpful. Does anyone have any questions before we wrap up? Especially based on what I've said, like if you want me to consolidate that, or if you have some follow-up questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll end this in a second. Thank you so much for being here. Make sure you check out Jedl.com. If you guys are struggling for analysis and you really want help putting the essay together sentence by sentence, that's why me and a really big team of teachers and past state ranking achievers, people who are getting full marks in these things, that's why we put together the Jedl platform. It literally is there to guide you sentence by sentence. So check out Jedl.com. Subscribe to your relevant texts, and that will give you all of that for your preparation for the HSC. Otherwise, plenty of other videos that will should help you on the YouTube channel. But yeah, if you want that deeper analysis, you want that those structures and everything like that, just go to Jedl.com, and that will help you out, no doubt. Does anyone on here have Jedl.com? Has it been helpful for you? I'd love to get the feedback as well. There's the link, Jedl.com. Go on there if you need. Any other questions? Thanks, Andy. Thanks, guys, for participating. Really appreciate it. It's been fun, hopefully helpful. The other thing I'd love to get your feedback on, I know you're all thinking about the exam now, and it's game time. But just on the note of game time, we brought out this game show, right? Jedl Mastermind. I put out the first episode last week. Would love your feedback on it. Like, what kind of questions, what kind of features would you like to see on that? I just want to make a fun game show for students who are going through the HSC. Just give you like a 10-minute reprieve there, a little break from your study. What kind of things would you want to see in a game show with students like you involved? By the way, if you do want to get involved, go to the video, go to Jettle Mastermind episode 1. It's on our YouTube channel, and you'll find a link in the description where you can apply, and you get like $100 if you win. As just 3 students, you just answer some questions based on what you're learning in English and some other subjects as well. Fun little quiz. You compete with 2 other people, and you can win $100 in like 10 minutes. So if you're interested in that, check out our new game show, Jettle Mastermind. And if you have watched it, please leave comments on how we could improve it, or what you liked or didn't like about it in the comments. But we're going to be experimenting with it for the next few episodes, and we'll try and create something really entertaining and valuable. All right, thanks everyone. If there are no other questions coming through, that is it. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon. I'll try and do another one of these before the HSC. Send me an email, just hello@jettle.com. Okay, hello@jettle.com. Send us an email with any questions you have about the HSC, anything you'd like us to make a video on, any kind of responses that you'd like us to critique, like I just did today. Here you go, hello@jettle.com. Send an email through to that. If you want us to have a look at your thesis statements, body paragraphs, I'll try and do another one of these very shortly. The other thing for everyone, really important announcement before you go, really important announcement, is next Sunday, I'm running a workshop where I'm literally going to take a small group of students through the precise techniques on how to deconstruct any style of question, whether you get extract questions, form-based questions. We're going to go through exactly how to do that. So if you are interested in that, go to Eventbrite and look up Jettle, HSC workshops. I'll see if I can get a link for you right now, and we will go on to that. Let me just have a quick look. HSC. So guys, a workshop, my last workshop for the year, I'll be running it as well. It's going to be really practical. We're just going to go through all of this different question adaptation techniques. So let's see if I can just grab that up for you. Here it is. Okay, I think it's 3 to 4 hours. It's $99. It's going to be a very small group. You're going to get one-on-one feedback in it as well. So the link is in the chat. There it is. There's the link. It's next Sunday, 25th of September. Okay, one-on-one feedback. We can go through all of your answers, thesis statements, all of the different question types. So there's a link for you there as well if you're interested in coming to that workshop. All right, thanks so much, guys. I will see you in the next one.